I'm going to have to stand here. Hello, everybody. So you're going to have to look at me over here and the screen over there. But I'm delighted to be here in Poland, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life in games, and explain to you why I love games that goes beyond entertainment. So we're going to look at my whole history in life. Now, these are not my children, obviously, but when we enter this world as babies, we interact with that world. We learn through play. Play is natural. And when we grow up, we enjoy solving puzzles. That's what we do as human beings. And when we attach rules to those puzzles, they become games. Now, I joined the games industry not long after chess was invented in 640 AD. I started a company called Games Workshop, and this was us in 1975. The person on the far side, the really handsome guy, that's me, with two old school friends, John Peake in the middle, and Steve Jackson on this side. And we wanted to turn our hobby of playing games into a business. So we published this full-color, glossy magazine here, and sent it out to everybody we knew in games. And one of the recipients of that was this gentleman here, who I owe a great debt to, and I think a lot of you do. This is Gary Gygax, a photo I took of him in 1976. He just invented this game called Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And it didn't look very much, very simplistic art. But when you opened up the box, it opened up your imagination like no game had ever done before, and I don't think any game ever will again. We ordered, 6 copies of Dungeons and Dragons, because that's all the money we had in the world. And on the back of that order, we got a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for the whole of Europe, because Gary Gygax was also operating out of his flat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, in the United States. We went over to see Gary the following year in 1976, and in this photo, this was taken at Gen Con in the United States. On the far side is Fritz Lieber, science fiction author. Next to him is Gary Gygax, the inventor of Dungeons and Dragons. Next to him is Professor Barker, who created Empire of the Petal Throne. Next to him is me holding the boxes, Rob Kuntz, another author of D&D, and Steve smirking at the front. The worrying thing about this particular photo is that the 3 people to my right are all dead, and I'm next in line. But I'm still here, so good. We also got to meet Miss Wisconsin, 1976. I don't know what she's doing today, but I'm enjoying myself here in Warsaw. And we came back to the UK full of excitement. We'd got signed up all these fledgling games companies. We were going to be kings of the gaming world. But we had no money. We'd been kicked out of our flat because our landlord had got fed up of people arriving, and there was a phone. The only phone that was in the building was on the ground floor. We hear the phone ring. It'd always be for us, and we'd race down the stairs. But Paddy, our landlord, who liked to drink quite a lot, was always there first. He'd answer the phone. Hello. You want Games Workshop, do you? You can go to hell. He used to hang up on all our mail order people. So we had to make a decision. So we go into the bank and say, we've got this great game. It's a role-playing game in which you're a hero, a wizard, and you kill monsters and you find treasure. And the bank manager looks at you like a dog watching the television. He has no idea what you're trying to do. And I think that still remains largely the same today. So we had to live in a van for 3 months. This is Van Morrison with his front garden. But it's okay, because when you're living the dream, it doesn't seem like hardship. So John Peake left, and so Games Workshop was now just 2 people, myself and Steve Jackson. But we wanted to really carry on with that business. We opened our very first retail shop in London in 1978. And this was the queue outside in Dowling Road in Hammersmith. The last few years, I've been trying to find all these people who are in the queue so we could do a kind of reunion shot, like an Abbey Road reunion shot. The problem is, today it's the Bosnia and Herzegovina Community Advice Center. So it might be a bit challenging, but with a bit of Photoshop, you never know. We also got into publishing magazines. We changed from Owl and Weasel to White Dwarf. This is White Dwarf #1. It came out in 1977. For some reason, it had decapitation on the front cover. And this is me putting the whole magazine together in 1978. We started developing board games, and I don't know if any of you have played Talisman. I know an awful lot of copies of Talisman were in Poland. Not official, I don't believe, but they're here anyway. This is us playtesting the original prototype with Bob Harris at the top there, who was the original designer of Talisman. And this is Talisman when it actually came out originally. So these are some of the board games I've invented. I enjoy inventing board games. This is my collection of board games at home. I'm an absolute board games fanatic, got over 1,000 at home. I still love it. And of course, Games Workshop today has got bigger. It's now on the London Stock Exchange. Steve Jackson and I sold out in the 90s, but it's now one of the most successful companies on the London Stock Exchange. And of course, Warhammer is why it's so successful. Now, we originally had this 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for Dungeons & Dragons, but at the end of that 3-year period, TSR wanted to merge with Games Workshop, but Steve and I were very independent, and we said no to that merger. So we lost the exclusivity for D&D, so we had to think, what can we do now? So 3 guys set about creating Warhammer. So that was Rick Priestley, Richard Halliwell, and Brian Ansell. And of course, the value of Workshop is now in the intellectual property, which is Warhammer. So whenever I say to people, if they're thinking about starting off a video games company or a board games company, try and hold on to your IP, because that's where the value lies. So often the case is you have to give it away for project finance. But if you can hang on to your IP, you'll build real value. And now, of course, Workshop are rebranding all their stores as Warhammer stores, because that's the brand that's become so important. We were talking about crowdfunding earlier. Steve and I are writing a book about the first 10 years of Games Workshop that you can still get through Unbound if you want to know more about the first 10 years of Workshop. We used to hold these great events called Games Days. This was Games Day in 1980. And people used to play Dungeons & Dragons, but also we used to have other stands along, and Penguin Books were there, and the editor was completely amazed that so many people, 5,000 people, were playing role-playing games. And she said, would you write a book about this phenomenon? Well, we said, rather than writing a book about it, why don't we give you a book that allows you to have the experience of a role-playing game? So we created The Warlock of Fire Top Mountain, Steve and I. It was the very first interactive book with a game system attached. This was a branching narrative. They were actually never published in Poland, but these were books in which you, the reader, were the hero. At the end of each paragraph, you had to make a decision, turn left, turn right, and when you came across a monster, you used dice to determine whether or not you succeeded. So there's many ways of going through the books, but only one correct way. This is when we launched our book in 1982, with the famous 1980s mustaches. And this is how I used to design the books, rather like a flowchart. This is the flowchart from Death Trap Dungeon, my best-selling game book of all time. It's very difficult designing them because writing them on multiple stories at once, trying to balance it, not make sure there's not too much gold, there's actually a real way through the book, that the difficulty level wasn't too hard. It's quite complicated. It was all our books were based in this world which was called Alancia. And I'm told, although haven't heard it myself, is that the designer of the Witcher game originally used our books as source material for his design. And also, I have heard from the designer of Dark Souls, who told me personally that he used our books for his basis of Dark Souls. So we prided ourselves with the covers of our books. We used some of our best Games Workshop artists because they were very kind of threatened the reader, really kind of realistic fantasy. We used to argue with the publishers who wanted to make the book's very safe, little goblins and toadstools. And we wanted covers that threatened to rip the faces off the readers, and we won that battle. We had some of the best artists around. Ian McCaig, my most famous fighting fantasy artist, he did the cover for my book, City of Thieves, and he went on to create Darth Maul for George Lucas. And you can see the similarity between Zambar Bone on the front of City of Thieves and Darth Maul. So we usually got foreign publishers to use our covers because we convinced them that ours were the right kind of covers. Sometimes publishers said, no, we know our markets better. And in Japan, for example, I will just show you what they decided for the cover of the Japanese cover of Death Trap Dungeon. They know something about their market that I don't know, which is interesting. But I'm delighted to say that it hasn't been announced yet, but our Fighting Fantasy gamebooks will be appearing in Poland next year. So stay tuned for more news about that, as will a range of miniature figures from some of the iconic covers. In the UK now, they've got new covers and published by Scholastic. And if you happen to be in London in August, the 31st of August, we're having a Fighting Fantasy convention. So, 20 million copies sold, supposedly a good thing, getting children reading again. And yet, the media at the time said that these books were bad. The Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide about them, saying, because you're interacting with ghouls and demons, you're going to get possessed by the devil. A worried housewife said on the radio that her son levitated because he'd read one of my books. And so everyone was thinking, really? For a couple of dollars I can fly? That's amazing. We'll do that. So this was great publicity for us. There was magazine articles saying that the problems of children using their imagination. There was petitions sent in saying people wanted, the parents, all these parents wanted the books banned. I have their addresses. I'll get back to them one day. So history has never been kind to games. In the 1850s, Scientific American said bad things about playing chess. And when it comes to video games, of course, the media really goes crazy about video games for somehow causing the whole of the downfall of society. And yet a game like Grand Theft Auto 5, a fantastic British success story, generated $1 billion in 3 days. And it's an amazing achievement. And I would argue that actually games are good for you because of the puzzle solving, problem solving, and learning intuitively, the creativity in games like Minecraft. These are a good thing. So parents should not be worried. So we've seen games move from a niche to a mainstream audience. Young people are playing games. Young adults are playing games. Old people like me are still playing games. We see games everywhere, pervasive on public transport. People are playing on their devices. We've seen how technology drives change the whole time, how VR's coming. We've seen games become a spectator sport. The rise of esports has been phenomenal. So whilst the older people in the world like watching real sports, today's modern generation likes watching esports. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of the esports that are being played these days, with people and teams earning huge amounts of money, playing people head-to-head in big arenas and streaming that through Twitch to audiences worldwide. So there are over 2 billion gamers in the world today, 10 million new gamers every month. It's a $120 billion a year industry. But let's go back a little bit to think, where did it all come from? It's not that long ago since Pong was with us. It didn't have great graphics, and yet it's all about gameplay. So when people say to me, when you design a game, what are the 3 most important things about a game? I will say gameplay, gameplay, gameplay. Graphics and technology play an important but a supporting role. And so let's go for a little bit of memory lane. Can you have some more volume, please? Nobody there. It seems quite incredible that it's over 20 years since Lara Croft first started bumping into doorways and killing endangered species. So that's how I got into video games, was through my book Death Trap Dungeon, which was #1 in the charts in 1984. And the founders of a company called Domark asked me if I'd write their launch product, do the design work for it, which was the game Eureka. So I invested in Domark. We published Eureka. It was actually programmed in Hungary. I joined Domark in '93 when I sold Games Workshop. And we put 4 companies together to create IDOS in 1995. And we acquired a company called Senegold in 1996. And with that purchase came Core Design and, of course, Lara Croft. So who created Lara Croft? It was, in fact, this gentleman here, Toby Gard, the artist at Core Design. He'd created, there was a game published by Core Design called Rick Dangerous, which was a tomb raiding game. It had a main character that had a slight similarity to a film star whose name I've forgotten. And Core wanted to take this new game to PlayStation, which was coming out in 1996. So he decided that really Rick had to change. So Toby was asked to create a new character, and everyone thought he was going to come up with another male character. But he'd seen kind of the rise of girl power in the 90s, Tank Girl, Nina Cherry, and said, why don't we have a female character? So this, I'm going to show you the first sketch of Lara Croft, was actually called Lara Cruz. So this is his very first sketch. People thought that Lara Cruz didn't sound very English, so somebody went through the phone book and came up with the name Lara Croft. And so there was lots of sketches done. This is kind of a manga-style sketch of Lara, until it was settled on Lara Croft as she was in 1996. And this is the box that we launched, developed by Core Design and published by IDOS, for which I was chairman. We had no idea just how big Tomb Raider was going to be, but there was a lot of love for Lara at the time. And she became a pop culture phenomenon, gracing the covers of not just games magazines, but also lifestyle magazines. We had different models representing Lara Croft every year. When we launched Tomb Raider at the ECTS, we had 3 Lara Crofts. And every year we had a new Lara Croft for shows, for publicity. And these are some of the Laras who were in our lives at the time. Every year we had a new one. This is old bloke with 3 Lara Crofts, old bloke with lots of Lara Crofts. But every time we had a new Lara Croft, it gained phenomenal amounts of publicity because everyone wanted a piece of it. And lots of anecdotes. David James, who was the goalkeeper for Liverpool and for England, let 4 terrible goals in. And on the back page of the Times newspaper, he said he played badly because he'd spent the whole night playing Tomb Raider beforehand. Prodigy were a year late handing in their album to their record company. They said they spent the whole year playing Tomb Raider. But the power of that brand was incredible. So what started off as a simple sketch became a global phenomenon. And all these companies, successful in themselves, all wanted to use Lara Croft to help promote their products. Lucozade in the UK, a fizzy drink, their sales went up 10% as a result of using Lara Croft. And they even changed the name of their drink from Lucozade to Larazade for 3 months. So I'm going to show you a couple of adverts from the time. Kind of socially quite amusing now.
Sélection.
Seat Cars in France.
À Ibiza.
Sauvegarder maintenant?
Non.
Sûr?
Oui. Alhambra. Montez, montez. J'ai peur toute seule. Seat, vous êtes loin d'avoir tout vu.
And even, thank you. And even the mighty Visa in parts of Asia. And of course, you didn't go unnoticed by Hollywood, who usually create their own characters or license from comic books or other media, but now they're looking at games because they realize what traction that the games industry has. I remember we had an executive producer role, and when they said they'd like Angelina Jolie to play the role of Lara Croft, we said, that's absolutely fine, no problem whatsoever. I did get to meet her a couple of times at the set in Paramount Pictures, and still recovering from that. So I'm no longer associated with Lara Croft. I was proud to be part of her life for 20 years, and long may she remain. It was a very tough job, but somebody had to do it. So just briefly about the UK scene. We've been pretty good at making games from the early days, from games you might have known, from Elite, Lemmings, and Populous, and Football Manager, all the early classics. We've been great at creating some fantastic intellectual property. There are over 2,000 game studios in the UK, 5 of which are now public companies. These are some of the companies I'm now associated with as a director. Some of the best and biggest console games are being developed in the UK, same for mobile games. Console games continue to grow. Just because digital and mobile comes along doesn't displace them, it just adds to the whole marketplace. We've seen some big numbers now. This is an amazing industry, $800 million generated in 3 days. The phenomenon of Fortnite, which has become a social platform as well as a games platform. Apex Legends jumping into that space. Have to mention the Switch just because my book's on it. And but some people are confused by 15-button controllers, but no problem. Along comes Apple with swipe technology, and everyone can become a user. Also access the App Store, which is very convenient. We've seen the rise of phenomenal brands in mobile. Clash of Clans, 5 years old, still generating millions of dollars a week. Golf Clash, another UK company, done the same. Pokemon Go, we're seeing geolocation now. Obviously, there are big challenges if you're thinking about getting into games development around marketing, monetization, metrics analysis, and monetization, and margin. It's still a very world's smallest shop window. For every Angry Birds, there's 10,000 dead birds, but that still doesn't put people off from trying to get a piece of this action, because 80% of the revenue on the App Store comes from games, so that's a great incentive. And now there's different advertising models that work well with consumers, that they get a reward for watching an ad, which they can spend in-game. And it's still just the beginning. Technology drives this experience like none other. You hear the recent announcement from Apple Arcade, and from Google, from Google Stadia, with cloud-based technology and streaming and subscription platforms. Look out, the world is just going to get bigger. So for the next 10 years, I've got to finish now, but just some of my predictions, what's going to happen in the next few years, how the world is going to move from 80% sales to 80% services, how streaming is going to take off. The value of the market is going to be $400 billion by 2028. There's lots of stuff to get excited about in this industry. But I'd just like to say a last thank you to my hero, which was Gary Gygax, who I last saw in the late 90s. He tragically passed away in 2008. Without him, would there have been a World of Warcraft? Would there have been a video games industry with role-playing games? I don't know. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I think we've got 1 minute for a question. But that's it. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for your games, and thank you for Forest of Doom, because it was the game that I learned English from.
Okay.
And and the question is about Death Trap Dungeon, the video game, because it was released in I think 1997.
Eight. Yeah.
Are there any plans to revive the game, because it wasn't as good as it was supposed to be?
No, it wasn't. The problem was it was a new team, and they hadn't ever done a role-playing game. So it was meant to be a role-playing game, and ended up being a kind of action hack-and-slash game. So it kind of got bogged down in games development. but I'd love to see somebody else develop Death Trap Dungeon into a true RPG, or even make Fighting Fantasy an open world RPG. Because we have so much content, so many books, 60 Fighting Fantasy game books, 5 or more source books. The whole world is built. We just need someone to digitize it.
Well, they are available on App Store, some of them at least.
Yeah, but they're still-
The Warlock of Fire Up Mountain and
Death Trap
Forest
Dungeon.
and the Forest of Doom as well.
Yeah, but they're still single adventures. They're just a digital port of the book. It's not an open world adventure, which I would like to see one day.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.